that's the value of ritual, is acknowledging what's going on, making something different, distinct, important, setting it aside, sanctifying the normal actions of life in a way so that they don't feel so mundane and part of the everyday mix of life, but instead feel separate and important in a different way.
Welcome to Inside the Circle, a series of conversations from Sangha. We sit down with our members and together we explore the practice of living fully in the modern world while staying connected to something deeper within. Through community, shared inquiry, and inner work, Sangha is an exploration into what becomes possible when we walk that path together in fellowship. The practice of living in the world but not being fully of it. To learn more about Sangha and our growing network of circles around the world, visit www.sangha.one. Welcome to this conversation with Meredith Whipple Callahan. Meredith is a partner at Trium, a firm dedicated to helping CEOs and their leadership teams build masterpiece organizations, ones with truly distinctive cultures, strategies, and missions. Her career spans Bain & Company, where she built the firm's global leadership program, Bridgewater, where she worked deeply on executive development and cultural continuity, and her own executive coaching and strategy practice. She holds a degree in religious studies from Yale and an MBA from Stanford. She's the author of Indispensable and The Intentional Life, with A Right to Lead forthcoming. She lives in Boulder, Colorado, with her wife and 2 children. Welcome to this conversation, Meredith.
Thank you, Ian. Always lovely to be with you.
It really is always lovely to be together. So the entry point for our time together, our dialogue, is as I was sitting with how to start this mini series of conversations, what emerged was really the core inquiry of Sangha itself, which we're all on a voyage of discovery into what does it mean to be in like-minded community for this time. So the kind of contemporary interpretation of that Sanskrit vibration, Sangha. And so I would love to hear from you how the idea of Sangha or community has been emerging for you for this time.
What does it mean to be in like-minded community at this time? You know, the first thing that comes up is the existential answer to this, which is that on some level, we're all incarnate in these bodies and doing something that we feel is very ego-identified and individual. And yet underneath it, we're all of the same source and spirit. And so the way that I hold together that paradox in Sangha and in community is this idea of me seeing myself and accessing myself and source and who I really am underneath it, and accessing that better because I'm actually in communion, in community with other people who are also presumably ego-identified individuals, but who are actually living the same trajectory of human experience as well. And the idea that we're both seemingly individuated, but actually all part of the same thing. I feel like I can see that better, see myself better in that, and see the truth better through that when I'm actually with other people versus by myself. That's the existential version. And then it feels like there's also some really pragmatic, practical version at this moment in time when we've lived through COVID and all the COVID lessons are so well integrated into our experience. And the reality is that we are living a life which is much more easily fragmented and out of community than it's been for a long time, that finding ways and places to be in community that feel both deep and truthful and sincere feels that much more important as an antidote to a lot of the ways that we let our society evolve. So both the existential version and then the pragmatic version. And then on top of that, I think it's just fun to be together in community and to find joy and delight in this embodied world when so much of our experience is virtual.
Yeah, and the ego, the separateness, we all hold it. We all, it's part of being in this duality that we coexist in. And being with folks that are kind of onto their egos is nice. And yet having it be the mirror, right? When you see someone, they reflect back to you those aspects of yourself, this identification with the separate.
I like how you
And
describe it as people who are on to their egos. Like, I kind of get what's going on here. I kind of get the gig. I kind of have suspicions of what might be going on because I find that for myself all the time. Of I'm onto my ego and then I forget about it, or my ego gets even more clever and does something else. And being around other people who are also, as you said, onto their egos means that sometimes they can see the ways that my ego is getting really, really clever uh, and almost wily before I do, which is helpful.
yeah, I mean, our egos are extremely clever, and it can be extremely subtle too. And yeah, the moment you lose being onto it, it's like this kind of game. Like it can be playful too, and you kind of think of it that way, right? Like, oh, I'm onto you, and we're all onto you. We're all onto each other.
Indeed, my ego is so clever that my ego thinks that it's like even more clever and crafty and intelligent ego than other people's egos, which is part of the way that my ego gets me on a meta level. Like, oh, look, I have an even more clever ego than other people's.
Yes.
It has even more moves for escape and evasion.
Yeah, totally. We yeah, I have that show up too on like this is a story I have on specialness and kind of finding ways, my ego finding ways to put me in a position where it seems special, even being onto the ego. Right, as a way of allowing me to be special.
Ian, are you a fan of the Enneagram?
I am definitely a fan of the Enneagram.
Are you an Enneagram 4 by chance?
I'm a 7.
Oh, you're a 7. I was going to say
Mm.
that it's a very Enneagram 4 trait to feel special and to prioritize wanting to feel special. I'll out myself as an Enneagram 3 with a 4 wing that, like, my ego
Mm.
loves to feel special. It loves to feel
Yeah.
special and it loves to feel better than, and it loves to feel unique and sometimes totally incomprehensible to other people because it's so unique.
Yeah. And there's a beauty to that. This is the humanity with which we, it's like leaning into the humanness of that can be on display in a song. I feel like a sangha, which is really just a microcosm for this bigger sangha we're all in, and this is this world. It plays back these ego elements, I guess.
Yeah. I take it not as any of those pieces should or even potentially can go away, but instead that just consciousness and distance and choice and even the opportunity, as you said, to laugh at the ego feel like most of the antidotes that we have access to in this life.
Mm. Yes, the power of story too. I feel like we just love telling. Like the ego is a story. It's a series of stories. It's a personal story, and then we sit with each other and we share stories. And it's like it's the way we sense make, right? Is through um, yeah, sharing these parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, in your journey, which is very interesting and multifaceted, and definitely holds these two dimensions that we call in Sangha of commitment to practice or consciousness work and being in and of the world and leading in the world. But there was a point as we had have talked before in your journey that I was curious about when you were at Yale and you were studying religious studies. Um, right, I think you shared with me in the past you were considering priesthood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I would love to kind of go back in time to that moment and that choice and like how you made that decision and how it kind of impacted the trajectory of the rest of your life.
It's an excellent question. It's a long way back to go for for me, but I can put myself back there. At the time when I was at Yale, I was very active in the Episcopal Church at Yale. In fact, I was the college kid who also was the sacristan of the Episcopal Church. And if you know what a sacristan is, it's the person who sets up and is responsible for the ritual space, meaning that arranging the chairs and arranging the altar and the linens and putting out all the materials for communion, that was part of my job. Including, and that meant I did everything up to and including washing and laundering the linens in my dorm room and setting up the ironing board to iron them. And so I was in a mode then in which ritually, spiritually, philosophically, I took my devotion to Episcopalianism and to Christianity really seriously. And at the same time, I was in the same moment that a lot of people find themselves in at college, of having for the first time in their lives exposure, and the first time of my life, exposure to a lot of spiritual dimensions that were far beyond what I was brought up with. And so I had a boyfriend who was Jewish, and I had friends of different faiths, and I was taking classes in religious studies that were exposing me to Hinduism and Buddhism and just very different traditions and ways of understanding the sacred. And so at the time, I found myself kind of in a bind of being really dedicated to my own spiritual path and my own spiritual tradition, and realizing that there were actually potentially many other ways of being on a spiritual path, which were not the ones that I was brought up with or born into. And so my interest in becoming a minister and my interest in going into the priesthood in the Episcopal tradition was born out of a sense of being on a spiritual path. And then the tension that I ran into was realizing that as I studied all these other things and was exposed to all these other parts of the world, that I no longer felt like I could take the creedal aspects of Christianity as seriously as Christianity almost wanted them to be taken, in terms of them being the one and only path or the one way. And so for me, it was that point that I decided not to go into ministry, but that I would pursue my spiritual path in other ways. And I've been on that spiritual path both long before that and ever since. But it was that turning point in college that I realized that there were lots of other ways of pursuing this work and pursuing this journey in and beyond myself.
Yeah. The linear paths that are laid out and then blown open in college dorm rooms. And I love the idea though of how rooted the ritual was for you and how important it was. And I'm curious if that has been a thread that has continued, like this idea of ritual and ritualizing life.
It's certainly still a thread in sacred ways and profane. I think I find ritual very supportive of imbuing meaning in different situations. So we just passed the summer solstice, and that was certainly an opportunity for ritual here. Usually on the solstices and equinox, I do a simmer pot with intentions, and also just acknowledge and appreciate the turning of the seasons. So there's certainly pagan and even witchy influences that have given me more of a nature-based cadence to my rituals today. But I think about ritual also in terms of you can ritualize anything. I remember when my kids were really young and they were toddlers and they were trying to potty train. We didn't want to put them in diapers, but we were going on a long plane ride. And so I ritualized and I made a thing out of, you wear underwear all the time, but this is a plain diaper, and a plain diaper is different. Like, this is a thing. This is a ritual. You get to the airport, you put on a plain diaper. It's different from other things. It's not a normal diaper. In fact, I wrote on the diapers, plain diaper, to differentiate it and set it aside from other things. And so I think the power of ritual and the power of that, the influence of that, was that they didn't associate it with normal life. There's not normal. I don't wear diapers in normal life. I only wear a diaper on the plane. And so there wasn't any backtracking on the potty training situation because we got to make it different and distinct and important. And to me, that's the value of ritual, is acknowledging what's going on, making something different, distinct, important, setting it aside, sanctifying the normal actions of life in a way so that they don't feel so mundane and part of the everyday mix of life, but instead feel separate and important in a different way.
Yeah.
You can use that one with your kids.
Yes, I'm like, this is the most
She's got
alive
time to
ritual.
go before she's potty training, but
yeah, but there's many diaper rituals, I'll tell you that. Yeah. It is though, and it is the intention with which we can bring to the doing the dishes and cooking a meal and sitting at the dinner table. It's all like, if we bring the intent to you also share the beginning communion, like in relation to community, like this whole reality is an opening for us to communion.
Yeah, I wrote actually my senior thesis at Yale on communion and the ritual aspects of communion, because if you take communion, or Episcopal communion, which is very similar to Catholic communion, if you take communion all the way back, like communion is the ritualization of a meal, right? It is eating and drinking, and that's what we've ritualized in communion. And yet we eat and drink every day and don't think about it. And so that form of communion is almost so far abstracted away that it doesn't feel like a meal anymore. It doesn't have a lot of the things we associate with a meal. We don't sit around a table, right? We usually serve ourselves. In a communion, you're served by someone else, right? You usually have freedom to take as much as you want. You usually have enough food to eat and feel full. Like, none of those elements are still part of the communion ritual, but it's still a meal. It's still eating. And so if you take that back then to what we can do about it, there's so much of the everyday that deserves ritualization if you want. But the challenge of sitting in ritual or sitting in a ritual space is that not everything can be ritualized. If you start setting everything aside and making everything sacred and sanctified, there's none of the mundane left. And the reason why ritual works and sanctification works is because there is the tension between the sacred and the mundane, because you have both, and only some things get to be sanctified.
Right. It's the distinction that allows for that to even be noticed, and to then be like leaned into. I'm also curious, in your journey, you've worked at some of the biggest companies in the world, and Bridgewater or Bain, like say Bridgewater, like, is there ritual within that, like the largest hedge fund in the world?
It's a good question about ritual at Bridgewater. When I think about corporate culture more broadly, culture is just built on the back of actions and words, and there's so much of culture that actually becomes ritualized over time. It's part of what makes really good corporate cultures sticky and embedded, actually. And one of my favorite examples of ritual at Bridgewater was something called the Scrum. And the Scrum happened every summer. When I was at Bridgewater, and this is back in the 2017, 2018, 2019 era, the main campus of Bridgewater was at a place called Glendenning. And Glendenning was a gorgeous office building in the middle of the Connecticut woods that had a stream running around it and also through it. And the Scrum was the annual challenge for everyone who was interested, which was, to be fair, a minority of the employees, to basically race around the office building in this pond/stream. And there were a number of parts of the ritual, including people getting in teams and dressing up in a certain way, and then scrambling through the lake. There was always a station to get a drink halfway through the course if you wanted to play for fun instead of playing for speed, and then a celebratory barbecue at the end. And there was something about the scrappiness and willing to get into it and to be messy and muddy and racing in a challenging course that felt like it matched not exactly the what you would see on a page about the Bridgewater culture, but kind of the ethos of we're willing to be in it and in the muck together and messy and figure it out and get out the other side. It's very different to run the scrum, for example, versus running a foot race or playing a game of ultimate frisbee. There's something, yeah, scrappy and audacious and really messy about it to get to the other side.
Yeah, even the word scrum feels kind of like I'm thinking
Yeah.
back to my rugby days. It's like there's a yeah, you're getting in the mix. There's another aspect in Bridgewater too on TM, right? Like that's a big part of the culture and
Mm-hmm.
meditating, right? For
Yeah.
bringing
I
that.
think Ray Dalio, the founder, found a lot of value in his own TM practice. And part of what he wanted to bring to Bridgewater was the opportunity for other people to take advantage of that as well. And that shows up both in, I did my TM training when I was at Bridgewater, and Bridgewater supported me in that and had all the meditation rooms scattered throughout the campus to be able to practice that. But I think even more importantly and more subtly, there's a way in which TM is actually embedded into the culture and the principles and the way of being there. There's a common phrase and an awareness at Bridgewater of you having two selves, the self that's in the scrum or in the situation, and then the self above the self that's observing you, which is a very Buddhist concept, actually. It's a very meditative concept to be the watcher. And people often talk about that, or at least in my time, talked about like being able to watch yourself or like be in your higher self and be able to watch what was going on with yourself. And that drives a lot of the thinking around principles too. Principles, which are really the guidebook by which Bridgewater's culture was codified and persists. In the principles, they're really about stepping above a situation, figuring out what are the principles that guide decision making in that situation, what are the things that you should do and not do based on the case at hand that you have, and then test those principles over time and say, is the way that I thought about operating previously still a way of operating that's of service to me and drives good results? And then being able to actually write those down over time. It becomes both the consciousness of meditation, of being able to look at oneself more objectively and learn from the situation, but then also the wisdom of codifying ways of being over time that can be applied and in which wisdom and learning can compound not only across one person's experience, but across a whole set of people's corporate experience to figure out how should we operate collectively and together. And so there's a lot in Bridgewater and the principles that drew me there. In a way, you can even think about if I go all the way back to my religious studies experience, Bridgewater is a place that actually has a volume, it has a tome, it has a holy book of the principles and the way that we're in dialogue about how to be together and what are the right ways of operating and the wrong ways of operating and what is celebrated and what is criticized here. Much like a religion, they're all in the book. Mm. And the way that we're living in this culture is actually an interpretation of the book, like a lot of the traditional Abrahamic religions, which are also book-based.
Yeah. And then the book becomes alive in the debate around the interpretation, right? So you can still be in kind of this curiosity, engaging process. It doesn't have to be, the dogma of the book, but the aliveness of the principles.
There's a book to be in dialogue with, right? There's wisdom to be in dialogue with. Like there's a tradition to be in dialogue with there, instead of a kind of constantly moving target of what are we trying to do around here and how are we operating again? So I can think of other companies as well, like the Netflix culture memo, that similarly instantiate the culture in something that's written and transactable that people can be in relationship with. And that evolves, like you said, evolves and is dynamic over time, but is also clear and tangible enough to give people an opportunity to respond to.
Yeah, it's like one of these core questions of structure and flow. When we started Sangha, my core inquiry was, what is the minimal structure required for emergence? But there needs to be in relation, as you were saying there, right? You need a structure, and it's like tradition and progressive mindsets. Like this tension shows up kind of everywhere.
The tension is structure and emergence, right?
Yeah.
And in the structure and emergence tension, or I call it a polarity, in the structure and emergence tension or polarity, you sound like you have a preference for emergence. What's the minimum structure I can get? How far can I get to emergence with it working out? But what's really true is that I think we're all looking for the third way in most cases, that we want the upsides of each of the good. It's emergence is a good and structure is a good. We want the upsides of both goods without the downsides of either. And that's kind of the third way, or the path that we're looking for, is how do I paradoxically have both, whether it's structure and emergence, or centralization and decentralization, or any other of the many polarities in life.
Yeah. In breath, out breath.
Yeah.
Well, we are coming to the end of our time. We have been ending these dialogues to honor emergence with a card pool that'll have a prompt. And so I will draw that now and we'll see where we go. If your heart could shout something, what would it shout?
I always trust my intuition, Ian, however crazy it sounds. And so when you ask that question, the first answer that comes up to me sounds like Ricky Martin in 1999. It says, "Livin' La Vida Loca."
Yes.
Like, just here, fully present in it, with joy and excitement and perfect acceptance of all the crazy that comes along with that. So.
I love that. I love that song. And that's a beautiful way for us to end our time together, living La Vida Loca together. So
thank you, Ian.
Thank you. Thank you, Meredith.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Inside the Circle from Sangha. If this dialogue resonated with you, we would love to hear from you. We invite you to learn more about Sangha, our upcoming circles and events at www.sangha.one.